this. So we're going to talk now about debugging. So debugging is probably, and I think I speak for probably every member of the Pencore team, the sworn enemy of any coder. It is a necessary evil that you will all have to endure because you will all be sat there in front of your code at some point or another for hours, wondering why on earth this thing isn't working. You've read through it hundreds and hundreds of times. You don't understand why this isn't working. And then you walk away, you take a break, you come back and you realize you've missed a comma, and you could have sworn that comma was there and that Python probably removed it whilst you weren't looking. Debugging is not a nice thing to have to do, but it is very important because you will have to do this a lot. You will make mistakes in your code. There will be things wrong with the code, and you will have to spend time trying to fix them. And it would be disingenuous for us to gloss over this slightly less pleasant aspect of programming. So it's better to try and get you in the habit of being able to look out for these kind of things. Now, the Python interpreter will often try to help you out if something has gone wrong, something's wrong in your code, by flagging out what went wrong if your code fails. How useful that advice is can vary wildly. So sometimes it's very useful. So I think I mentioned it before, but a common thing that I do, even to this day, is I still forget, probably about 7 times out of 10, to put brackets around a print statement, around the statement I actually want to print. But Python comes up with a wonderful message that just says, I think you probably meant to put brackets around that, around your print statement. Did you mean this? So it's really helpful for that. I don't remember it used to say that. I think it must have learned from me. But anyway, but other messages, I'm sure Mike will go with tales when you get into some of the machine learning stuff about some really unhelpful messages that just seem to make no sense or have no bearing on what the actual issue is. So the level of that help can vary quite wildly, but it is your first port of call, and at the very least it will usually give you a useful line number to say something's gone wrong on this line. You might want to have a look at that. It may not be that the problem is there, it might be that the problem is up above, and when it got to that line, that problem became known. So sometimes you have to do a bit more foraging around. But let's look at some examples. So I'm going to make this interactive. So please feel free to all turn yourselves off, mute, or and shout things out. So what's happened here?
The user's not
It's
an integer in. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. So here we've got a user input. We've asked them to input a number and then try to multiply them together. Now the user may well have put an integer, but of course it will be read in as a string, even if they have put a number. So we've forgotten to cast the input as an integer. Now obviously that's something you've done quite a bit in the practice. Don't think you won't forget to do that. I did it only the other day. You will forget to do it, I can guarantee. So it's worth bearing that one in mind. Okay, what's happened here?
There's only 3. There's not 4 elements in the array.
Index starts at 0s.
Yes, exactly so. So remember, and you will forget that the number counting starts at 0. So the first entry, apples, would be index 0, oranges would be index 1, and strawberries would be index 2. So by referencing list 1 element with an index of 3, that doesn't exist. So you'll get this message saying list index out of range. Still pretty useful. I think that's quite a good one. You can usually, when that happens, you've usually got the numbering marked off, and it's usually not quite as obvious as that. It's usually where you're passing in, rather than a hard-coded number, you're passing in the result of a variable, and it's usually something's gone wrong in that. Okay, what's happened here?
Spelling mistake.
Where to?
In the wait time int, it should be wait time str. The cast.
Yeah.
Cast.
Exactly. So here again, a common mistake. So got current time string which is an input here, wait time string. So we're reading them in as strings. That's fine. Then we're going to cast them as integers. So I've said current time int is an integer casting of current time string. That's good. And then I've got wait time int equals int casting of wait time int. Well, that doesn't exist yet. And so it's thrown up wait time int is not defined because, of course, we're saying, well, the wait time int is an integer casting of the wait time int. And Python is saying, that's lovely. What the hell is wait time int? That's a recursive definition. I don't know what it is. Yes, that's why your name is not defined will be another common thing that that you'll see quite a lot. Okay, I'm going to see if anybody else can pick this one up.
Equals. Only a single equals, not a double.
Exactly, yeah. And again, this is another common thing that you will do a lot. You're remembering that the single equals represents assignment. So it means this now contains this value. Whereas if we want to say is something identical to something else, then we use the double equals. I should say if A equals B. So what we've actually said there is if A, I'm giving the value B, which obviously doesn't make any sense. So we get the invalid syntax statement. That's quite a common one. I think yourself lucky. I can't remember. Is it PHP? There's one language where it goes up to 3 equals, and I think it might be PHP. It's a nightmare. I hate it. So think yourself lucky. You've only got single and double. And I also like the way I like to think about it in my head to try and minimize the amount of time I do this is to think of A equals being assignment, but A is strictly equal to that sort of extra bounce in the way I think of that phrase in my head causes me to put in the second equals. It can be quite a nice way to think about it. Okay, what's happened here?
Missing parentheses, isn't it?
Yes, it is. When I read back through this the other day, I thought, what is wrong there? And I just have a look. Yeah, this is a good lesson in not having lots and lots of nested statements because you will run into a nightmare of, hang on, have I closed the right number of brackets? So we haven't got, if you count up how many opening brackets we've got in the if statement, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many closing brackets have we got? We've got 1, 2, 3. So we're missing 2 brackets here. Now the way Python will do this is it still thinks we're in brackets, so it's read that as part of this, and then it's got that, and it doesn't make sense. It falls apart, so it gives you an invalid syntax error. So yeah, be mindful of using too many brackets.
Can I chip in quickly, Dan?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So if you have that in Spider and your cursor was on that line and you have your cursor next to a bracket, it will highlight the matching bracket. So it'll help you if you put your cursor at the you put your cursor on one of a bracket.
Yeah, very good advice. So yeah, it's a really nice feature of Spider that it shows up the matching bracket. So if I was to take that out, so that one matches with this, but where's that one? And it comes up in red, so you can see there's no match. So that is quite useful if you're doing. Thank you, Kerry. That's a really good point. Okay, let's go back.
May help for the upcoming exercise.
I don't know what you mean. Okay, what's happened here? This is a bit trickier.
Is it expecting something else after the else?
Yeah, because
Yes.
you covered it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, this is something that you may not be aware of in Python, but you have to be very careful. I've done it myself before. If you include an indentation like else or if or a function call, you better put something in it that's not a comment. It needs something. And so if you do this where you've just got a comment, that doesn't count as valid code. The interpreter ignores it. So it's expecting something and it didn't get to anything. So it will give you this unexpected EOF, which is end of file, while parsing. So it was expecting, it said, yeah, else, and then it reached the end of the file. And so it's still waiting to know what to do else. You could have completely omitted the else if you didn't need to do anything. And that's what you should have done in this instance. But if you put else, you better make sure you've got something to say about it. Now, one tip, sometimes as you're building a program up, particularly if it's a complex program, you might want to just test a bit of it. So you may have something you're going to put in the else bit, or you're going to put in a function call, but you don't want to you don't want to write it quite yet. Rather than putting a comment saying, come back to this later, although you could, I would recommend doing that. Just make sure you just put one line of code, and it's just the keyword pass, P-A-S-S. And what that'll say is, just skip, don't do anything. And then Python will be satisfied with that, but it needs some code. So it's a good thing to do as you're building up programs, to build them up bit by bit and say, I'll come back to that in a minute. I just need to make sure this is working. That's absolutely fine. But if you've got an indentation, you have to have some code in there, even if it's just a code that says, stop, don't do anything.
Or you can join the debugging club and have lots of print got here scattered around your codes. So it prints and then you wonder which one of it was actually there that it got to.
Yes, that's actually a really good tip. So you'll find yourself doing this a lot when you're debugging. I don't know where it's got, how far is it getting? Is it getting this far in my code? I'll print a message saying I made it to the if statement. And you'll think, right, okay, so the problem must be after that. It's quite a useful thing to do in debugging. Okay, what's happened here?
You've not
The
entered
second subject shouldn't have self there? Or no?
No.
Is it you're referring to self.name, but it's not? No, it can't be that.
Look at the error message, see if that gives you a clue.
Is it you've not put the self subject equals subject underneath the second definition?
No.
Should you be referring to a Pencordian rather than the class Pencordian? So Dan.start teaching.
So strictly speaking,
once you've defined one.
Strictly speaking, yes, although that's not the error. So that's actually, well, it's not bad practice, because there are situations where you will see them for some of the methods we show you, despite what we've told you this morning about you should always create use the class as the blueprint and then create copies of that class. There are certain circumstances where you don't do that, you just refer to the class. So you can actually do that. But you're right, it's probably bad for this, it would be bad practice, but it's not the error.
Is there no Pencordian to start with? So there's no self.name to find because there's nobody classified under the class Pencordian.
Well, again, so if we were creating an object, you'd be right. But I can do that. I can just say in the Pencordian class, call the method start teaching.
But does this not actually know who is programming? Because the name's not passed anywhere.
Yeah. So yes.
Do you need to the Pencordian.start teaching? It needs 2 arguments put in there, so it needs something before programming.
So it needs a name and a subject in the variable.
Yes, exactly so. So we've created, this one's a bit trickier. In order to set up a Pencordian, the constructor requires both a name and a specialty, and in order to start teaching, it requires a subject to start teaching, and in that sorry, no, I'm talking absolute nonsense. That's not the error at all. You were right. Who said about you haven't created an instance of the object?
That was me.
Thank you. Sorry, Greg. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what it is. Sorry, I said no, and that's exactly what it is. It shows you don't even know when your own deliberate code is wrong. That's exactly what it is. Yes. So what I've done is I've just called the start teaching method of the Pencordian class. Now you can do that, but the problem is the start teaching method requires a copy of the Pencordian function, and therefore you haven't created a Pencordian, so you're dealing straight in the class. That's why you get the error message saying it's missing a required positional argument. So if we trace this back, what you're actually doing is you're calling this method. Now, if you were calling it, if you created a new Pencordian and then called that method, you would just pass in programming, and that would be absolutely fine. But because you haven't done that, because you've just called the start teaching method, it's still expecting the a copy of the object, but it hasn't got that. So that's why you get that error message, which even threw me out, even though I wrote it. Yeah, so be careful of that. So you're absolutely right, and you can do this where you just call on a function within a class and don't create an instance. But in that case, you're going to fall over if you call this, because it hasn't got a copy of self. So you'd need to pass in something that would satisfy that. So it's a slightly more complex one, as demonstrated by the fact I missed solution. Okay. It is time for an exercise that I have unapologetically made devious. Okay. This is probably the most fun I've ever had writing an exercise, because what I did was to write a program and then tear it to pieces. So I've given you a file called debuggingchallenge.py. You can open that in Spider. And there are lots and lots, and I mean lots, of errors in this code. Now, I've also provided, if you prefer to work in Jupyter Lab, I've put the same challenges in debuggingchallenge.ipynb. Now, there are a lot of errors in this. I've also deliberately not put any comments whatsoever. So your first task is to try and work out what this code is actually supposed to be doing as well. Hopefully it's not too ambiguous. You should be able to work out roughly pretty quickly what it is, but then try and work out how it's set out and why it's set out in that way. That will help you, because you're first going to need to try and work out what this code is meant to be doing to try and fix it. Also, just to add in some nastiness, there are errors in here that won't be picked up as syntax errors or errors in preventing it from running. So there are things in here where you'll be able to run the code, but it just won't work as you would expect it to. So you're also going to need to test this thing very, very carefully and thoroughly. So for that reason, I'm going to insist that you work in groups, and you are going to be doing this challenge for an hour. I'm going to give you an hour to do this. Well, just under an hour. 4:15, we're going to come back. I can tell you how devious this thing is because, as a slightly amusing anecdote, as I was looking back through my notes last week, as I always do, to just refamiliarize myself with the next week's content, make sure everything reads okay, I suddenly noticed that in my two versions, one of which was the challenge with all the errors, one of which was the fixed version, that somehow I'd managed to put some of the solution in the solution file and some of the solution in the apparently broken file, and vice versa. So what actually I had was two broken files, neither of which worked, and some of which had bits that were correct and some of which didn't. So I had to sit down and painstakingly go through my own challenge in order, because there were no comments, I had no idea. So I had to go through and do this. And in fact, I had to do it twice, because I also then had to break it again in all the right places where I hadn't done that. So I have been through this. This task is designed to frustrate you, because real debugging will frustrate you. Well, in fact, I don't apologize. I've been through it, so if I can do it, you can do it. Have fun, or try to have fun with this. Have a look at the code. as a group, see what you can work out, what it's trying to do, and then try and fix the thing. You've got an hour to fix this. Okay, you should have a working program that not just runs, but does the thing it's supposed to in all aspects. Okay, any questions about Dan's devious debugging challenge? Great. Okay. Pop into your team chats. The mentors will be floating around quietly laughing at all the pain that you're having to go through because we're so used to having to do this. And I will see you at 4:15. Have fun.